Well, we haven't done one of these in a little while. It's Market Rumblings here on the fourth period. Dennis Bernstein, I'm David Pagnotta. And DB, the talk of the town in the last couple of weeks seems to be Jack Eichel of the Buffalo Sabres. How soon can we say Jack Eichel, formerly of the Buffalo Sabres?
Well, you would think by draft night, Dave, but it's got to come down to his health as well. You have to make sure that neck injury is on its way to be healing and that he could start the season. So I think that's what we're looking at with respect to a possible trade. But sooner than later, I don't think Jack starts the season in Buffalo. It doesn't make any sense for him or the organization.
Is it possible that because there's so much talk lately, and here's what happened. So they had the conversation, the Sabres and Eichel's camp had the conversation again about where they are and what are the next steps. And that led to conversations with other teams. And clearly, people are talking. So now it's getting out there. And that's why we're seeing so much of this. Do you see a scenario where maybe this happens a lot sooner than we think? Could this possibly happen before the expansion draft? Could it possibly involve Seattle? How do you kind of pencil this one in terms of when it's actually going to go down?
Yeah, I don't think the expansion draft factors in here, Dave. I really don't think Seattle's going to be a player. I don't think it's going to be a three-way trade. Let's put it to you that way. And it's the only way I see that happening because Seattle doesn't have the capital to get Jack Eichel. It's as simple as that. So if they came in as a third team, possibly, I think just a straight-up two-team trade. And you got to figure that there's going to be a first-round pick going back to Buffalo for the draft, for this draft. So I think that's where the sense of urgency is. We're about a month away from the draft. So I think that's where we stand right now. And you want to throw out teams. I think Anaheim certainly is a legitimate prospect. Columbus has 3 first-round picks this season. They certainly need a number one center. So those are 2 teams I look at. Yeah, my hometown team, LA, there's still chatter about that. But I really think that the team 30 miles south of Staples Center, Anaheim, is probably positioned better right now, given the fact that Ryan Getzlaf's contract has expired, and that's about $8.5 million in cap space off the books.
Yeah, Anaheim certainly has it. They've got $22.5 million right now in available cap space. But it doesn't mean they'd be willing to take on all $10 million of his cap hit. I got to imagine somebody is going back to Buffalo in that deal. And I can tell you, it's probably not Adam Henrique, because I'm pretty sure Buffalo's on his no-trade list.
Yeah, you're right, Dave. And it depends. It could be one of the defensemen, but it's going to be some of the young kids. Max Comtois, maybe a Sam Steele. You'll have to have your pick of the Anaheim prospects. But, yeah, either that or maybe some retention from Buffalo as well. Not really sure how that would work out. But, yeah, to think that the $10 million is going to sit on Anaheim's books for the entire amount of his 5-year, the balance of his 5-year deal, really doesn't make sense either way.
What about all the talk of Minnesota? Eriksson Ek possibly is a centerpiece. He's an RFA, so maybe that offsets in terms of money. Do you think Minnie's a real threat here?
I don't think so, Dave, because just Eriksson Ek alone is not enough for me to make a Jack Eichel trade, and I wouldn't want to break up this core right now. I wouldn't want to throw a defenseman in and maybe the backup goalie as well. To me, for Billy Guerin, it doesn't make sense. Doesn't mean he won't do it because Billy Guerin's taking risks. But at this point in time, the fact that you brought Kaprizov in, and now you have a team that was dangerous in the playoffs. Dave, they may be the team that took the Vegas Golden Knights to the longest run in a playoff series when we're all said and done. So to break up that core now, maybe last season, yeah, but not now. There's too much good stuff going on in Minnesota to think you're going to break up the core right now.
Maybe it's Sam Reinhart if you're looking at another piece out of Buffalo, because he's being talked about as well. The New York Rangers, they formalized and made Gerard Gallant the head coach officially Wednesday. Are we seeing a trickle effect here? Is this, okay, we got our coach in, now let's go make a splash? Or, I mean, does Eichel really make sense for the New York Rangers in terms of what they could possibly send Buffalo's way?
No, when you have Mika Zibanejad and Ryan Strome as your 1-2 in the middle, doesn't make any sense for me. I don't get that. I get they have the capital. I get they probably have the cap space to do it. But again, I don't see Jack Eichel going to New York. It doesn't make sense unless the owner comes down from the owner's suite and says, yeah, trade for Jack Eichel, make it happen. Other than that, there's just too much good stuff going on because you know what? Kakko's finally going to emerge. Lafreniere is going to emerge. There's too many good pieces there to think, okay, again, they're close to being a playoff team, right? Just maybe Gallant puts them over the finish line with respect to the postseason. But to break up that core right now, I don't think it makes any sense.
All right, let's shift gears here because we're going to be talking about this all throughout the rest of these playoffs and then leading into the offseason ahead of the draft and the expansion draft on July 21st. 2 days later, we've got the NHL draft. Let's shift gears a little bit. Let's go to Boston, a team that has a ton of questions going into this offseason. They've got a ton of cap space, but they've got some key decisions they have to make, specifically right off the hop. David Krejci and Taylor Hall. How do you see this unfolding with the Bruins?
I think they have to bring them back, Dave. I mean, they finally found a combination, at least in the regular season, that worked on the second line. Now you're not going to bring these guys back. That doesn't make any sense. You're going to have to rebuild the second line. Jake DeBrusk looks like a goner. I mean, he had opportunities to score in the postseason, didn't work for him. So I think to finally find the equation that helped David Krejci, and he wants to come back, and so does Taylor Hall. Now, Taylor, you're going to have to probably take less money than you would in the open market to come back, but I think he realizes it's now about winning with his career. When you turn 30 years old, and he's about to turn 30, at that point in time, you're going to say, hey, what about my legacy? I'm going to make good money. I've already made great money in this league. So to think that they're going to walk away from those two players, it doesn't make sense. I think the Smith, Krejci, Hall line, and maybe next postseason they'll do better than this postseason, but it's the makings of a really good team.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it's $7.25 million on the books right now for David Krejci. That's going down. Probably $4 or $5 million range.
Yep.
Yeah, somewhere there. And Taylor Hall acknowledged that he's willing to be in a position to take a little bit less, but he wants term. He wants stability. So I could see a scenario where you're looking at a 5-year deal, probably $5-6 million a season, maybe closer to $6. Realistically for Taylor Hall, but over term. So you're looking at maybe $10-11 million that's going to be allocated for him and David Krejci, and then you've got other areas that you've got to figure out, namely the defense. We'll talk about the bottom six in a second because that needs to be revamped. But deficiencies on the blue line were evident in the postseason, especially against the New York Islanders, and when Carlo and Miller went down, there was nobody there to step up. Do they address that area on the blue line?
They have to. I think they have to address their left side at this point, Dave. I think a guy like Vince Dunn in St. Louis, who's on the market, who's available, he's not a top pair defenseman, but he certainly would help. He's 23 years old. He's a restricted free agent. Maybe a DeBrusk for Vince Dunn trade would help both sides. So I think that would be the type of player. But they do have to address it because what they have in their system just isn't there. Look, you're never going to replace Chara and Krug in one off season. But they do have to have some heavy lifting on the blue line if they think they're going to be continue to stay in contention.
You mentioned DeBrusk earlier, and the bottom six is an area that they have to address. They have to improve. Is he destined for Seattle? Is that, if you're the Boston Bruins and you're trying to get that money off the books to free up to help out other areas of your roster, are you going to try to entice the Seattle Kraken to take on his contract, or can you find something else in terms of options?
Well, Dave, I get scared when I hear that word entice because I remember all the teams that entice Vegas and look where they stand right now. So I think just letting Jake DeBrusk be exposed to the expansion draft, he can still be a quality player in this league. I'm not giving up on him or anything like that. I'm not saying he's not effective. It wasn't a good season for him. It wasn't a good postseason. Fresh start. There's a lot of players around the league, Dave, that need fresh starts. And Jake DeBrusk going to Seattle with no pressure on him, maybe playing top line minutes, that might work for him. So I think that's a more realistic thing. I think that GMs are going to be very wary. Unless they want to move big money off their rosters, I don't think they're going to entice people to take the seventh or eighth person off the roster. I think the mindset of most GMs right now, Dave, is we're going to lose a good player. Let's just swallow hard and just move on from there.
Yeah, well, let's keep going with the Seattle Kraken at this stage. Are there any other scenarios around the league? I mean, Tampa's still in it, so they've got a scenario that they've got to figure out. Everything looks like it aligns to Tyler Johnson eventually going to the Seattle Kraken in some facet. But there are other areas or other spots around the league, where you can see a scenario where something like this plays out and could potentially benefit the Kraken.
Yeah, well, I'll give you one player that if Philly's in the Jack Eichel hunt, maybe they entice Seattle to take Jake Voracek off their hands. Clears a lot of cap space, and that maybe if you can tell Buffalo to say, okay, retain $2 million. That's Jake's number. So that would be a move. And Jake doesn't have any no move protection. That both Hayes and Giroux does. So I think that would be a player that might be a situation where Philly might, Chuck Fletcher might call up Ron Francis and say, look, let's talk about this player. What can we do here?
That's an interesting one. And for me, here in Toronto, the Maple Leafs have a lot of decisions they have to make. It sounds like Zach Hyman might be pricing himself out of this particular market. They got Jason Spezza signed on Wednesday, league minimum, but provides depth in their bottom six, and he deserves it. He did well for them. But I wonder about Alex Kerfoot, $3.5 million. He's a serviceable player, but for a team as cap-strapped as the Toronto Maple Leafs, I got to wonder here if Kyle Dubas and Brendan Shanahan are giving Ronnie Francis a call and saying, all right, we could expose him, we could trade him to you. How do we make this happen so we can get $3.5 million off the books? I could see that being another possibility here as we get closer to the expansion draft.
Yeah, absolutely. And $3.5 million on a third line, that's a luxury with a flat cap, Dave. So I think that would be a wise move, just to have the conversation. And again, we're just talking about having conversations. There's nothing really, nothing's cast in stone here. There's nothing that's imminent at this point in time. But there will be a lot of conversations. Again, I just think GMs are cautious knowing what happened in Vegas 3-4 years ago to say that we want to just overload prospects and picks to get a player off our roster.
Well, let's take a break here for now because Philadelphia just went nuts over what you just dropped on them. So we'll let things cool down. We'll get to more market rumblings as the weeks progress, and we'll be doing this more frequently on the fourth period throughout the course of the playoffs, leading up to the expansion draft, leading up to the draft and free agency. Stick with us here on the fourth period for more. That's Dennis Bernstein. I'm David Pagnotta.